I want to start with a story. And I want you to all picture walking into this room. And you're given a chance, an opportunity, to speak to two people. The first person, person A, has a business degree from Boston College Business School, did graduate studies at Stanford University, 25 years of marketing experience, an entrepreneur that owns their own business, manages multi-million-dollar budgets, works with small businesses and Fortune 500 companies. That's person A. Person B, happily married for 20 years, has two beautiful kids, 11 and 14, that end up having to share the same birthday, if you can imagine that. Dedicates their time to serving first responders and firefighters, mentors inmates in prison on a monthly basis, suffers from extreme anxiety from time to time, and has found a career dedicating himself or their self or herself to others, finding their sole purpose to impact global change. So the question is, how many of you were walking in this room and picked person A to sit down with? Don't be shy. How many would pick person B? A few more hands with person B. So why is it that more hands went up for person B? And I think ultimately when we walk into any room and we see other human beings, there are certain things that human nature calls us back to being simply humans. So what do we crave most as human beings? I heard you, Aaron. These are the four things. If you look at all the research that's done out there, social research, all the experience, and I'm going to say from my own personal experience, these are the four things that humans crave most. Connection, how we connect with one another, including how we connect with ourselves. Safety, that we feel safe enough, secure enough in our own homes, in our workplaces, even with ourselves to share our intimate details or know who we are as individuals. Belonging, acceptance, feeling a part of something so that we don't feel isolated. And ultimately, I do believe the number one thing that humans crave is love. And then I often get asked, okay, well, if these are the four greatest things that humans crave, what is it that allows us the tools to create those four amazing things, whether inside the house, out in the workplace, out in the workforce, meeting new people? What is it? It's our voice. I believe our voice is the single greatest tool you will ever possess on this planet. Ever possess on this planet. And it's free. You don't have to buy it. You own it. It's your voice. Voices have the ability, our voice, anyone's voice has the ability to what? Bring people together and create division. Inspire others or tear people apart. Our voice is an incredibly powerful weapon, but it's also an incredibly powerful tool for change. So what makes our voice unique? Story. And I think this is the number one thing that some people often neglect, is that once we get into the story, we get into those feeling words of, oh, I don't want to talk about my story, or that makes me uncomfortable, or, I don't want to share that. And what does my story belong in the workplace? Why does my story matter? Stories create three things. And let's go back to human nature. If I were to get up here and immediately go into, a resume or this or that or 4 steps to this or whatever it is, you kind of lost me, right? Because I'm not creating a story that connects. Stories create relatability. We can come from all parts of the globe, but one story can connect us all, and that creates relatability. The second is vulnerability. We've heard this word a lot. Without reservation, without judgment. It takes all the walls down, and at one point we can actually look at one another and say, I hear you, I feel you, I know you. That's what vulnerability is. And the third, if I'm sitting there and you now know a lot more about me, let's say, there's a trust factor. If somebody just walked in and started talking about, they're a VP of global sales and blah, 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 do you trust them? Yeah, they may be really smart in what they do, but would you trust them outside of the workplace? But what's the number one thing that happens when we start thinking about our stories? It's the fear, let's just say it's fear. Let's go a step further. Fear of expectation and judgment. Everyone has this fear, innate fear in us, that if we tell our story, someone has an expectation of something else, or someone's going to judge us, and then we go right back into staying quiet. And after I just told you your voice is the most powerful thing that you could possibly own, fear and judgment take that voice away. And I'm also a firm believer that the number one social disease on this planet, and if you look at Facebook, if you look at Insta, you look at all the social media things, the number one social disease on this planet is the disease of I am not good enough. And I don't know about you, but I'm raising kids too. But it is a different world to teach them what feeling comfortable in their own skin looks like. So I want to talk to you about the power of story. And I may have to sit down on this one, because I'm going to get a little bit vulnerable. I might get a little bit uncomfortable here. I spend most of my days working with TEDx speakers. And I never know what I'm going to get. I have clients that I work with that are solving world hunger, solving issues with addiction, anything you can possibly think of. There are TEDx speakers out there looking to get their message out there. So I want to share with you an experience that I had with a woman who's probably in her early 60s. We sat down one day, it was only probably 2 months ago, and she's sitting there and she's like, I want to talk about social dynamics, family dynamics, unconditional love, and that's what I want my talk to be about. And I said, well, go a little deeper. What's the story behind that? And she goes, well, I don't know if you really want to hear it, but here it goes. I have a son. He's struggling. His marriage is in shambles. He's drinking too much. He's isolating. He's disconnecting from everybody around him. He's about to lose his job, and I don't know how to help him. He's at a loss. And I looked at her, I said, now you're getting to the real story. And her first response was, why would you want to hear my story? That's my personal story. That doesn't belong out there. No one's going to connect with it. And I looked at her and I said, I do. And she kind of looked at me and paused, and I said, what if I were to tell you, I am your son? 5 years ago, you would not recognize the person that's standing on this stage today. I related exactly to that story. I was lost in a career. I had turned 40 years old. I was disconnected from my family. I was isolating. I was drinking too much. I had no idea where my path was going. I was a lost soul on this planet. It's the first time I've ever acknowledged that on a public stage. And she looked at me and she said, I can't believe you just shared that with me. It was the connection, it was the trust, it was the vulnerability. And she said, I've been afraid to tell my story for fear that I would be judged and the expectations of me would be completely different. And I said, welcome to the club. So after telling her that story, I went through my whole barrage of things that had happened to me. And she goes, well, how did you get where you are today? And I said, I owned my story for the first time without shame, without guilt, without fear, without any reservation that someone was going to judge me. And 24 hours later, she called me back. And she said, I just want to let you know, the fact that you took the time to inspire me to tell your story, I reached out to my son. I reconnected with my son. I put him in a treatment program. I told him I would pay for it. As long as when you got out of that, you're going to make it a mission and our mission to go out and help other families deal with the emotional intelligence and the lack of mental health resources for people that are struggling. And now I just found out right before this conference, she wants to start a nonprofit to start working with families to deal with all of these things. So we went with one story that she was so scared to talk about, and now she's turning it into a nonprofit, and now she's turning it into a movement to be able to help others. Now, I'm not saying go out there and tell your deepest, darkest secrets. And I do have a cousin in this room that's probably hearing this for the first time. So Jennifer, you can take, there you go. You can take this back to, yeah. So take your stories and without fear of judgment and expectation, grant yourself access to new opportunity. Because she just opened an entirely new she's applying for the state of Washington to get a 501c3 to focus a nonprofit on supporting parents that have kids who are struggling. Now, one thing I want to add to that is we all have this hormone inside of us. It's called oxytocin. You've probably heard of it. And one of the greatest things that I feel when we unlock our stories is when you unlock your story, that's the same oxytocin, it's the same feeling you get when you give somebody a hug. If I've unlocked anybody else's stories today that's had a member who's gone through some shit, that's oxytocin. Oxytocin seeks out other oxytocin. One of the deepest connections you can possibly have with storytelling. That can happen in the workplace. It can happen at home. It can transform the way you create cultures in your business. Like I said, it doesn't have to be these dark secrets. It's a collection of experiences or stories that you're going to relate to one another. I'm a firm believer that great leaders today, the single thing that they can do is honor the voices and the stories of everyone that they surround themselves with. It's not about personal agenda. It's not about do you know your stuff, what's qualifications, what certifications, all this kind of other stuff. Great leaders inspire through story. They inspire through looking them in the eyes and saying, your story matters. Whatever it is, your story matters. Bring it to the table. Everyone has a seat at the table if they're honest enough to bring that story to light. I love this quote, and Malala, I think everyone knows, where she's been over the last 5 to 10 years. But when the world is silent, even one voice becomes powerful. If you go back and look at that woman's silence, that she had an absolute silence around her story, all it took was one voice for her to start a movement. All of you have that ability to figure out what that one voice is and do something totally different. Shake it up a little bit. It could bring some discomfort, but on the other side of discomfort, every single time I've had this uncomfortable conversation, something beautiful emerges out of it. I've never had it not fail. So test it out. So I want to look a little bit, get some anatomy of a story. People often say, what does an anatomy of a story look like? I think it boils down to 4 things. One is that moment of engagement. What's the first thing that I got up here and said? I didn't say what my name was, what I did. I simply started with an exercise of getting you to think a little bit differently. 2, the deep personal connection. You have to have some sort of personal connection to that story. How many times has somebody told you a story and it doesn't land the right way and they say, oh, you had to be there? Well, yeah, you had to be there because you had no deep personal connection to that story. So think about what your connection to that story is. The 3 is impact of adoption. How can this serve others? If you're trying to measure which story matters most, the only measurement I can say is how many impact, what's the tenfold impact on lives? How many lives are you actually going to reach? And the 4th is an invitation to join. Stories don't end just because you say they end and it's about me. Invite people into the story no matter what, because they could be your best rock star to get that story even bigger and better and stronger and create the ripple effect. Storytelling is contagious if you're willing and honest to get up there and say it. So how do we grant ourselves access for storytelling? We spend billions of dollars every year on professional development. Skill sets, this and that, application software this, learning this, certificate. How many of you have actually sat down and said, I can invest in my voice? Not many. And I can tell you there are companies out there that if you ask about professional development, investing in voice, they will do it. It's the single greatest loss in investment I think that we have today in the business world. Second is let go of expectation. Let go of some of that shame and the guilt and the uncomfortableness of all that. Let go of expectation. I spent a life living somebody else's expectation, and at the age of 40, I fell apart. And it wasn't until at the age of 40 that I realized I wanted to start doing this and helping every single one of you get the story that's out of you to create social change in the world. That's purpose, that's fulfillment. That's letting go of expectation. Inspire leadership, ignite movements. Take Catherine's. She's going to go out and create a nonprofit. That's a movement to help people and create new cultures. Storytelling has the ability to create new cultures. So let's go back to person A and person B. How many of you would still pick person A to sit down and hang out with? Maybe? Or person B? Maybe? All right. What if I were to tell you person A and person B is me? It's the same person. But I gave you two different narratives of the same person. And the person that you actually really want to get to know is the one that's on the right, person B. So what story are you going to tell the next time you talk to someone? The number one, the worst question I hear when you go to a cocktail party, hi, my name is, what do you do? Who cares what you do? Does anyone care what you do? So I've started a new social experiment, and I go for it. Tonight, happy hour, whatever it is. Instead of walking up to some person and say, hi, my name is, what do you do? Say, hi, my name is, when you get up in the morning, what inspires you? I guarantee your conversations at cocktail parties will never be the same, and you'll probably walk away with 5 more scanned barcodes on your LinkedIn account. Far more effective than saying, I'm VP of Global Sales for blah, blah, blah. So in conclusion, don't be afraid in today's workplace to own your voice. And this is coming from a man on a stage who's getting vulnerable, and I'm going to share it. It's okay to be vulnerable in the workplace. If you can't get vulnerable in the workplace, you're working in the wrong company. If you're in a company that doesn't allow you to share your story, appropriate as it may be, you're in the wrong company. You're in the wrong business, and you're not creating the impact that you personally have the ability to do. Because if you don't do it, you're not living the journey you're meant to do. You have the ability to grant your own access to a lot of things, and I think a lot of us in this room, me included, for 40 years, used my story, or lack thereof, to deny myself access to what I was truly capable of doing. I would not be standing on this stage today. I would not be helping Chai get up on a TEDx stage and give the talk of her life. I would not be up here helping people find their true purpose had I not had the ability to own my story and allow others to unlock their own, to grant themselves access to new opportunity. Go tell your story. Thank you.